making this painting, but is this gonna make me any money? You know, like, can I sell this? Would people want this as a print or on a t-shirt? And I'm like, why does that matter? And then I realize Instagram's crouching on my shoulder like a goblin or a gargoyle and is like, make a post for the people. And I'm like, but I just wanted to draw, Instagram. And Instagram's like, no, carousel presentation. Like,
Today we're welcoming Val to the podcast. She goes by Voodoo Val. She's an illustrator, educator, and an unapologetic Star Wars nerd whose passion work opened doors to official Lucasfilm pieces with Penguin Random House. I'm really excited to dive into this chat to learn everything about keeping that spark alive while the internet tells you to package it differently. What stays private versus what's widely available to your audience, and how do you market yourself without losing your true authentic self? Let's welcome Val to the podcast. One of the common things that I've been talking to all my guests on the podcast is putting yourself out there and just seeing what happens and what hits. And working on official Lucasfilm posters, was that like a dream opportunity for you? And then a follow up to that is once you've worked on the dream opportunity, what happens after that? Does your dynamic with creativity change, or how does that work?
that's a really great question. So a big Star Wars fan. If you don't know, now you know. And I got approached some years ago, maybe 4 years ago, and it was a Lucasfilm gig through Penguin Random House. So the folks at Penguin Random House reached out to me and said, "Hey, we have this Lucasfilm project that we're working on. Would you like to do a poster?" And I've done 3 of these projects to date. So there's a couple of like Barnes and Noble exclusives that have posters that I did that come with them, and then I did a book cover most recently, which is my very first book cover, which is really cool. Getting the opportunity, I think really woke me up to the reality of what I was actually striving for in my creative career. Because I think that before you land like a dream gig, you have a very different idea of what obtaining that will look and feel like for you. And so I did the project, and I would say that the only times I felt positive working on any of those projects was when I got the call and they asked if I could do it, and after it was done and they said it was approved. Everything in between that was a nightmare because, number one, I love Star Wars, and number two, it was nerve-wracking because I was like, I'm getting to create work for an IP that's so near and dear to me, but also it's like this is one of the biggest companies in general, and definitely one of the largest companies that I have ever had the opportunity to work with, and I wanted to do it right. So there was a lot of nerve-wracking there, wondering if my art was going to be good enough. But I remember asking after the first project was over, I was like, I'll wait to ask questions until they tell me that the art was good, right? I asked them, I said, how did you find me? Because I don't have an agent, and you usually don't have the opportunity to land projects with people that big unless you have an agent. And at least in my experience and talking to other people. And they said, well, we were looking for somebody who could do Star Wars art, and we found your fan art online. And I was like, that's awesome. And it kind of like, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but there's kind of like a weird thing in the community where people are like, you shouldn't be doing fan art. Some people think you shouldn't do fan art because it's not your stuff. It's not, your work.
Art.
Yeah, it's not your design and everything.
Yeah.
And I've always been like, when I feel some type of way about my creativity and stuff, doing fan art is always something that brings me joy. It kind of gets me back to like the reason why I started doing creative work in the first place, because I loved other creative work and I wanted to participate in that, I kept doing fan art even though I was discouraged for a time And then that ended up being the thing that led them to me, which was really cool to learn because I have a Behance project called, I think it's just called Star Wars fan art on Behance. She's like, yeah, I found this, and we were looking for somebody that paints Star Wars baddies, and you had like a whole project just full of the bad guys. And I was like, yeah, which is also, of all 3 projects I've done, they've only had me illustrate villains, and I'm so okay with that. So okay with that. Um, but yeah, they found me because I chose to put time into something that brought me joy creatively. And then getting the job was totally different than what I imagined, you know, me in the future doing work for Lucasfilm, doing a book cover with Penguin Random House and stuff. I was like, when that day comes, I'm going to feel awesome and have no fear. Wrong. It actually gave me the biggest dose of creative professional fear I've ever felt in my life, but I did it and I'm proud of myself for doing it. But in a way, it kind of shook me, and I was like, okay, so then when I'm working on anything else and I feel like I'm not doing well enough, I get that imposter syndrome and I'm not doing as good as I should be. But I felt like that when I was doing official Star Wars stuff, then maybe that feeling doesn't mean I'm not good enough. Maybe it's just the feeling that happens sometimes. Um,
It's what they say. If you're nervous, that means you care. And just having to work on a dream opportunity is like, I recently worked with a client like that, and the whole time it was nerve-wracking, but then the problem solving that I ended up doing for them surprised myself and surprised me and my abilities. And I was like, oh, I did not even know I was capable of doing this, but actually I did, because all of these years I've been working towards this day or this moment where I get approval the first time I present something and they trust me for me and what I bring to the table. And I think something that you said about personal work and just finding that joy to take time to actually create something that you like and you enjoy and really love doing is what inspired someone else to look at you and work with you and collaborate with you. And I think that brings me to this question where um just like thinking about that personal time, and a lot of people associate burnout that you experience in running a business or just being creative. Does personal work kind of help you with getting out of a rut or the burnout?
Usually, yeah. Um, but sometimes part of the burnout is not trusting your creative voice, right? And I think that there's varying levels of that. I would say most of the time when I find myself in a burnout, it's because I've been doing work for other people that isn't what I would choose to do. But a job's a job's a job, and my initial understanding of what it might be like to work in a creative space professionally was like, it'll be great because every day I'll wake up and I'll draw pictures and I'll flutter around my house like a creative fairy. No, it's like you do have like bite-sized moments where you're like, it's me, I'm that girl. But you also take jobs that you don't necessarily want because you got to pay bills. You got to do what you got to do. And in those moments when the burnout is related to me putting creative energy towards stuff that doesn't really fulfill me, right? Doing creative personal work really revitalizes me a lot. Putting time and effort into something that I just like. And typically what I do is I pull up one of my favorite shows and I watch that show while I do like a fan art portrait of one of the characters that I love. That's always, my first go-to whenever I'm feeling that way. However, and I've mentioned to you this before, and it's something that I really wanted to talk about, is I'm kind of at the tail end of a major burnout and like creative block for a separate reason, and that was, I think everybody gets into the mode where like trusting your creative voice is difficult. When you start to feel that imposter syndrome really hard, and then all of a sudden doing the things that bring you joy don't really help because the joy is kind of tangled in the worry, right? Um, and in those times, I find that the best thing to do is to reach out to other creatives and I chip away at random things while I'm in like a Discord call with somebody, or I recently went to PAX West, where I got to, hang out in person with a lot of other creatives. Cause, usually I'm pretty solitary. I'm an inside cat. So I'm like at my computer all day. But being able to go out and talk to other people and be surrounded with external creative energy, helped to revitalize that for me. So either turn to, what brings you joy, or turn to your community. And if you don't have a community, you don't feel like you're a part of one just yet, there is absolutely one waiting for you out there. There's too many of us little weirdos drawing pictures out there to not be somebody waiting to talk to you, my friend. you know?
I have been in that place so many times, but it's so hard to specifically pinpoint that this is where my creative block is ending and now I'm shifting to that creative energy and I can draw again or I can design again.
hmm
So, what makes you so sure about, yes, I'm back and I can draw, I'm great at this, and I know how to do this?
It's if I lose track of time. If I lose track of time, I know that I'm starting to get it back. Stella's on her way in, finding that groove. Um, because when I feel the block, when I'm stuck in that rut, I get fed up with what I'm doing. I come to the point where like I can hardly sit still. I can't stand to look at what I'm making, or I'll finish a sketch or something and be like, I'll go do something else and come back to it later. And then I don't come back to it later. But if I forget to eat lunch when I'm working on something, which is maybe a weird indicator, but it's true. If I run out of time, or I look up and I'm like, oh, it's been a while, then I know I was getting into it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that what I was working on is like a masterpiece, right? But I know that I'm finding that mode again where I'm like creating very seriously throughout my day. And sometimes a lot of it can be a balance of like creativity, confidence, but also things that have nothing to do with your creativity. Like, am I sleeping? Am I hydrating? Am I eating regularly? All of these things. And I kind of forget that because when I'm worried about my creativity, I only consider professional options.
The more you can focus and the less your mind wanders in the moment when you're being creative, I think that's a good measure. And this is not a health podcast, so it's okay to forget lunch while you're creating. But also that brings me to this question: where is it important to create personal art while you're working on client work? Do you do that?
I do that. Sometimes I feel like in the last couple of years, I've been incredibly lucky to be working on client work that I did really truly enjoy, because I've been working with my buddies recently. But when I'm working on client work that I'm like, another website. I think like I'm gonna be straight up honest. I think like designing a website is probably, if I don't have to do it, I won't do it, and but I'll sacrifice for the job, right? But I've spent so much time in my early career designing websites that now I'm just like, nah. But if I find myself doing something like that, where I'm like, it's just kind of a grind, it's a drag, but I got to get through it. I will take a break, and at least at the end of my work day, I will try to put time into something creative that brings me joy. And if that doesn't work, I play a video game that is like visually stunning. I usually reach for a piece of art to consume if I can't create something original of my own, or do like fan art or something. But the end of my day always includes something that I just like that has nothing to do with the client work. And if I don't do that, I sometimes, I feel like the work suffers if I don't try to refresh myself that way.
Interesting. I sometimes watch sports documentaries,
Mm.
which is so random, but yeah, I'm not a big sports person, but I still watch sports documentaries. I watch Formula One on the side,
Oh,
but
okay.
yeah.
That's very interesting. I
Yeah.
would not have I would not have pegged you as a sports talk
Yeah,
gal.
no, I watch Formula One, tennis,
Mhm.
and some other things that I won't talk about because you're not supposed to watch as an adult. It's only for kids.
Hey, man,
But
that's okay. I sometimes find myself, I'm like, I need my whimsy back. What do I
yeah,
do? And I'm like, what was on Nickelodeon when I was 12?
yeah.
Let's go find that. And then before you know it, you're in your early 30s watching Rocco's Modern Life again. And I'm like, okay, this is cool. It's cool. It's fine.
So, apart from okay, so this is too faceted, but I'm curious if you're creating when
Hmm.
you're feeling the creative burnout, is that not counterintuitive? Like when I'm feeling the creative burnout, I sometimes don't even create personal art. And
Mm,
that's like the worst end of it, where I don't even want to draw, I don't want to think about anything creative. I just want to stop everything because I'm feeling the imposter syndrome so hard, and I feel like I'm having all these feelings of I don't deserve to be here and why am I doing this with my life?
hmm.
And so what happens then?
That's a great question again, because that was kind of like that was the monster behind the thing for me recently. Was I was like, I think the resounding thought, and I'm going to share it with you, just because it was like the realest, most difficult thing I had been trying every day to defeat, and it was, am I trying too hard to exist in a space I don't belong in? That was my thing. I was like, and it did kind of seep into everything because I was trying, like you say, like, do you create when you're feeling that? And I was really trying every day to do it. And it was like every time I'd pull up reference to work from, I was like, are you really a creative, or are you just copying what other people do? Are you really drawing this, or are you drawing the same thing you draw over and over again? Like I was in my feelings. I was. Um, and there was some days there where I just had to like put it away, and it was hard because I feel like I should be creating every day. I think a lot of creatives have that, where it's like you got to exercise that muscle every day, and so it took me a little while to get over the guilt of not being creative for a full day. And I think what ended up being the turning point is I just had creative conversations and stepped away from making the creative work, and took a few days to like not be forcing myself to work. But it lasted longer, I think, because of the reality, and that is that sometimes you hit creative block, but you have a deadline to meet. You have clients you've made promises to, you've taken money for a job that you have to complete. So it was like trying to push through to those deadlines while also attempting to take some space away, and it can be difficult, but I find what works most often is keeping creativity close, even if you're not doing it with your own two hands. Is what makes it a little bit easier. Stepping away from the work for a while when you really can't do it, but still like watch your favorite show, read a book, play a game.
Write a
That's
book.
beautiful. Write a book.
Write a
Yes.
book.
Hey, yeah, that's true desperation when you're looking for something creative to consume and you can't find it and you're staring at a blank page. You're in
And
the
you
pit,
just
man.
create it.
Yeah, you just
No,
write
I
it.
think that's a great way to actually even exercise that muscle in your brain where you're trying to upskill yourself
Hmm.
because, as you said, creating fan art can be or ignite that thing in you where you're like, am I just copying someone else's work? Or it can
Hmm.
even be for someone designing a brand identity
Hmm.
and you're looking at other people's things or you're looking at mood board inspiration from whatever website you look at.
Hmm.
And at one point, if you're gathering that inspiration and you're too close to that, it almost seems to you that, oh, am I just copying someone else's brand or like a cafe that already exists?
Hmm.
And then you get into that existential crisis and you think about how that kind of influences your own work. And that's
Yeah.
why they say, like, not have that reference image or not use references and all those cliche things that creators are always told, similar to
Hmm.
what they say about fan art. And it's just, yeah, it's always just that thing where how do I upskill myself or how do I train that memory
Hmm.
by, but also not look at references.
Yeah. I have a theory though that I think that a lot of those things, like those harsh rules that people are like, you're not supposed to do that. I think those rules were made up by somebody who was in the middle of a rut, right? Like somebody experiencing imposter syndrome right now was like, you shouldn't use reference, it's ruining. You do it, and it's like, to an extent, I think it's true. But I think, as much as I am a Sith girly, okay, I don't think creativity can be measured in absolutes. I really don't. I think that it's a fluctuation. It's something that's ever moving, ever changing, just as people are. And if you constrain yourself to an idea of how you're supposed to be creating, and you don't leave room for change from season to season, even from day to day, hour to hour, as a human being, as an organic thing that is fluctuating, I think that you kind of do yourself a disservice. And to be very clear, I am doing myself that disservice every day. Like, because you change your mind about stuff and you get into different modes. But as long as you remember, to go back and to, be a little gentler with yourself eventually, I think that we're on the right path. And for the most part, I have to remind myself that, like, I am imperfect, but that is a strength when it comes to throwing paint at the wall, right? And as long as I remember my own advice eventually, I'm fine, because I don't think a truly good artist exists who is perfectly comfortable and confident with herself at all times. I think that doesn't inspire the production of creative work. I don't think it is a space for creativity. If you're like, oh, comfortable, whatever. The best things I've ever done, I struggled to create. Not necessarily like it was painful for me to do, but I was solving problems through all of those steps, even if it was something that I have painted 1,000 times. I can't tell you how many portraits I've illustrated. That's my bread and butter. That's my happy place, is character portraits. But sometimes I take a gig for character portraits. Been doing a lot of, like, Dungeons and Dragons work lately, illustrating, casts for D&D campaigns. And even as somebody who, I feel like, if I closed my eyes, I could still draw a portrait on canvas. It might be a little Picasso-esque, but I could get it down. As somebody who, I feel like, if I was in the right mode, I could, like, crank out a dozen portraits in a day. I still hit those little roadblocks throughout, and I have to solve the problems, and I have to figure it out. And I think that that's what breeds truly good work. So if you're worried that you are not comfortable and self-assured and confident all of the time, that is not actually what's going to help you be great, in my opinion. But for some
Hmm.
reason, every once in a while, I'm like, well, if I'm not confident, I'm not where I'm supposed to be. But that's not true. It's not true.
Yeah. If you're comfortable doing it, I think as a human being, creative or not, you just tend to take things for granted,
Hmm.
and you
Hmm.
just don't put in your 100% into the thing, or even more. Don't put in your all into the thing that you're doing at the moment. And on the same nerve of just struggling to create, have you ever experienced that when your passion of creating became a job, you struggle to have the same kind of approach to it?
Yeah, yeah. In a couple of ways, because I think, when you're doing it every day as a job, you do have to remind yourself of why you started doing it in the first place, right? I think we all need that reminder. But I think, when I started educating, that transformed my whole creative process in a way that I didn't expect until I stopped doing it all the time. Um, so I was a Photoshop instructor for Adobe for a lot of years, for like 10 years. And I got so used to, showing my process in a way that I could teach somebody about the process, and illustrating in a way that would not, that would, number one, be honest, so that somebody could come and watch those training videos and stuff and really truly get something out of it that could supplement and support their creative journey. But also, we're live streaming, and nobody wants to watch, like, a super boring training video. So, like, also illustrating in a way that, holds attention and keeps people engaged. But that's not how I paint when I'm at home by myself. You know what I mean? That's how I paint on a live stream. That's how I put on a show while also being educational. And I recently, I'm going to say like maybe 4 months ago, I sat down and I realized like when I sit down, I was painting the way that I teach. But I don't teach people to paint the way that I paint. I teach people about different approaches that they can pick and choose how to employ for themselves in whatever way they see fit. And I forgot that. And so I realized that I was painting for an audience that wasn't there, and I was painting in a way that wasn't my normal, right? And I had to relearn how to approach work in the way that got the job done and made me happy versus in a way that you could organize into a syllabus, right? So that was the major, like how creativity being a job transformed how I naturally approach artwork, for sure. And it was like it took me a hell of a time to like figure out, I was like, what's wrong with me, what's going on, you know. um
It's like the social media conversation that how do I create what I really want to create versus how do I create what I think other people want me to create, or
yeah.
at least what the social media feed wants, which I honestly struggle with every day. Where I'm not creating for social media, but I always think about when I'm creating anything, in the back of my head, there's this voice that's always telling me, so how can you share this on social media? You're not great at this, but then you still have to share your work. So
Hmm.
where's the intersection of this?
I think it's identical to that whole thing, right? Because like I'm also like, I'm making this painting, but is this gonna make me any money? You know, like, can I sell this? Would people want
Yeah.
this as a print or on a T-shirt? And I'm like, why does that matter? And then I realize Instagram's crouching on my shoulder like a
Mm-hmm.
goblin or a gargoyle, and is like, make a post for the people. And I'm like, but I just wanted to draw, Instagram. And Instagram's like, no, carousel presentation. Like, but I only have the one image. Make a video. Make it
Make
into
it
eight
move.
pieces. Yeah, yeah. Add motion design. I'm like, what do you
So
mean?
Instagram is a, I think it's a different beast altogether, but
Hmm.
do
Hmm.
you balance your time and energy spent on promoting yourself on social media, or do you just think that doing it in person is the way to go?
Um, I can't answer that question definitively. I can't. I'll tell you what I'm doing, and I'll tell you what I'm happiest doing.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's not helping, but I have to do it the way that I'm doing it. Otherwise, I go a little nuts, right? And I think we've all, like, that's no secret, and I feel like that's not going to be an uncommon sentiment for anybody that stops in here to listen to us yap about it. Is that like Instagram kind of like makes you want to just leap into the sky, right? Like, because I struggle to do those peripheral things naturally because I just want to draw my little pictures in my little cave with my little
Mm-hmm.
coffee, and you know what I mean? Like, I just want to make things. But I have to be my own manager. I have to be a marketing team. I have to be a copywriter. I have to be a graphic designer and an illustrator and a motion graphics designer, if I want to have all the things. To make the money that I need for me, but that money doesn't also, include the funds to hire all of those people. And then there's also the thing where I realized like individual creatives are competing with large companies that do have marketing teams, that do have, a separate person for motion graphics and static posts and videos and video editing and product management and marketing and all that stuff. But when people consume the content of individual creatives, they expect like, you know, all of those other things that their favorite brands are also kicking out. And then, the solo creative is not as popular if they're not producing like a whole team's worth of content. And I tried for a really long time. In fact, I think my Instagram is like kind of a graveyard of all of my attempts at major branding. And you were there for a lot of that too, where I was like, girl, I'm making reels, I'm making jokes, I'm dancing on Instagram, but
The
you like you,
popsicle series.
oh
The
yeah,
popsicle series was
I
my
was like,
favorite.
I'm gonna do like all these projects, and I'm gonna keep, and when I scroll through my Instagram, I can see like, okay, here's like a several tiers of particular branding where I was like, I was gonna try this, and then under that is just chaos. And then you can see before that the time where everything was all branded and had all the same colors going on. I'm like, who's she? And then underneath that is just like, here's a whip sketch. I just was desperate to make a post today. And it's like that. And I'll tell you what, those little areas on my Instagram look really nice and I'm proud of the work that I did, but I wasn't happy when I was making any of it. And I
Mm,
found that for me personally in my journey, which might not be the same for everybody else. What I have to do is post what I can when I can and not sit down and force myself to be a marketing team because that kills my drive to create faster than anything else.
mm,
I would rather skip a couple meals than worry about what I'm posting to Instagram. And I also find that because it doesn't come to me naturally, anything that I'm posting that's like an informational post on Instagram, I it's disingenuous
mm,
because I'm a little more chaotic than that. But then I've seen people like, honestly, I feel like you're an excellent example where since I've been working with you, since I've known you, you've always been somebody who is very organized, who's very analytical and very well spoken. I find that all of the classes I've watched of yours, everything is organized so well that anybody can understand it, but they're not simple concepts that you're talking about, which is a true gift. And I was like, thinking to myself, especially before I came on here today, I was like, Anika knows how to make like a carousel post, man. Anika knows how to fill a space with content that's like useful. You know, I have had to accept that I am the work in progress sketch goblin. Um, and that's okay because I know I'm not the only one. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
I think to that point too is you have your strengths where you're making, like we were talking about live streaming earlier, and we were talking about how to make that content into something that's not only usable but watchable.
mhm, mhm,
And when everyone's posting stuff to YouTube and Instagram and 10,000 other platforms today, it's so hard to have that retention where people are just tuning in for that tutorial,
mhm,
but also for you and what you bring to the table and how you're drawing the portraits and what's your energy on the live stream, because it's not just the ideas that you have but also how you're executing them while
mhm,
also imparting value, and it's just like multifaceted thing that you're doing on YouTube. So yeah, maybe you don't like sharing stuff on Instagram, but you like sharing stuff on YouTube.
mhm,
And
mhm.
is it that self promotion that's kind of distracting you from the creative process? Is that what it is that doesn't allow you to share stuff on Instagram?
Yeah, because I'm not I don't really take photos of myself. I definitely don't take videos of myself unless I'm sitting in my studio space, right?
Mm,
And it seems like the things that are very popular to consume on social media are not my natural mode of like capturing myself.
yeah.
Um, and I get exhausted with the self promotion because I feel like it takes me more effort to plan how to promote myself than it does to create the project. And then after I've extended myself or overextended myself for the sake of marketing, I still have to do the work, you
Mm,
know? Um, and I found that the best work that I've ever had the opportunity to work on didn't always come from me posting. Now, the Lucasfilm stuff did, and so I try to remind myself of that. So when I finish something that I think is truly good, I make the effort to make the post. Right? Like
mm,
when I create something, I think the delineation, like the marker where I'm like a post needs to happen now, is when I create something that I feel or other people feel, because sometimes I don't feel it, but other people are like, that's a level up,
mm,
like you did something that you haven't done before, or you did something you've done before, but today you did it particularly well.
mm,
That's something that you promote so that other potential clients and potential community members can see that you're growing. Those are important moments. But a majority of the stuff that I've worked on has been um, working with the people that I have met in creative spaces when I went looking for community. Um, Building a rapport and a working relationship with like-minded creatives so that when they, not, I guess not so that when, but it's turned out that when they are looking for an illustrator, um, I come
Top
to
of mind.
mind. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's kind of a delicate balance as well. And I think people are gonna know if you're, rubbing elbows for opportunity.
Hmm.
But I think that like as long as you're genuinely making friends and you're like you find creative people that you just love to talk to, you eventually end up kind of working on some cool stuff together. And then those projects, because there's so much passion in those projects, those things have led me to like cold calls because somebody
Yeah.
saw the thing that I worked on, and yeah, so definitely a different than your expected social media adventure with being a creative, but I don't think it's unique. I don't think that's a unique journey. I think that there's a lot of people out there who are struggling with that, the social media stuff, and looking for alternatives, and looking to build connections that they can maintain, just like anybody is. Maintaining a
Yeah.
client list is the same as maintaining a list of trusted creative friendships. And sometimes that's what leads you to water rather than like I made a carousel post that went viral. Because how many of us actually go viral? Not
Yeah.
me, girl. Not
Also,
me.
it's I've heard and read about this a lot, where everyone, especially in the creative space, who has gone viral has never been intentional, or they couldn't predict it, and it just happened by accident. That's something they did while showing their true personality, and that's also something that I try to do more now, more than ever. Is That's what made them go viral. It was never the trend. It was never the audio or the trending audio that they used. It was never the informational carousel or anything like that. It's just them truly showing who they are and what they do, instead of being here's a day in the life of a designer or whatever. And I think that's something to think about too, where do you draw the line, or is that something that's really promoting your business? While also on the same nerve, I also think about how can I do this in 5 minutes and record myself speaking to the camera and just make a video. And I've been following marketers and PR experts on Instagram and other places where they say take 10 minutes out of your day every day to talk to the camera and think about it as you having a conversation with a creative friend. And this is something that I've been working on, where I was recording an outro for another episode, and I was talking to the camera, just thinking about the takeaways that people might want from the episode. And just looking at that and thinking about the script, I was like, maybe I can make this into a different short form video. And that's what I personally do to create short form tutorials or whatever, where I'm like, let's repurpose this content. Where, yes, there are terms for it, but it's actually true. Um, yeah, but it kind of works, and I need to practice what I'm preaching because I haven't posted in 2 weeks. So,
Though, right? Is that I like, but I said earlier, like I don't do it all the time, but as long as I remember my own advice eventually and try to employ it honestly, as I
yeah.
encourage other people to, then we're fine. And I really liked what you said about is using the trending audio and doing a day in the life really the thing that's helping your brand. And you're absolutely right in that the things that end up going viral and that get around to everybody and really make the space right and encourage those trending audios, encourage those trending formulas and stuff, are the people who did something candidly,
Mm.
or naturally, and everybody liked it so much that now everybody's doing it. And I'm definitely past the point of, because when you're usually using social media and you're creating content, there is always like that background hope that like this is the one,
Yeah.
this could be the thing, but I think that I'm mostly now like, I think as long as I post honestly, um I will be proud of what I'm posting. And if anything is going to get super popular, it'll be something that I put my heart into. Um, or a video of me, falling at an event. That maybe too, but because that happens. But yeah, something, something that is honest and true, rather than like I spent 4 weeks, trying to create a series. However, some people are really, really good at that too, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like some people are really good at planning that content and everything. So I want to make sure this is no shade to people who are doing the day in the life, who are doing all that stuff. It's no shade, because I wish I had that skill, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
It would be awesome.
I try to do it, and every time I think about pointing a camera at my face in public while walking in a coffee in my hand, I will
Yeah.
fall.
I'm
I will
already
fall.
afraid of everyone seeing me. I don't want to be like filming me seeing me.
Yeah,
It's not.
no, it's hard.
Yeah.
And like just thinking of like social media and what attracts people to your work in a
Mhm.
social media aspect, but also from a client perspective, do you ever kind of strategize in a way that you're creating something particularly to attract one type of client? Like sometimes we mold our CV when applying for a job
Mhm.
just to have
Mhm.
that job requirement. Do you ever do that with your art?
Yeah, I definitely. I learned a long time ago a very hard lesson, and that is you never put anything in your portfolio that you wouldn't want somebody to ask you to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again because it really, man, I went through it. I There was a time, and this is something that is true for all creatives. I think at some point in your creative journey, you only have the things to put in your portfolio that you've finished, right? Because you don't have a lot of finished work. So you got to put all the stuff that you've done that looks halfway decent into the portfolio to start getting to the work that you like to do. And it can't, not everybody, it comes from the same place or has the same situation, financial or supportive or whatever, that everybody else has. So you might not even be in a position where you could do like personal work to beef up that portfolio. And I had in my portfolio the website stuff that I'd done and drawings that I did for somebody of robots. And let me tell you, two things that I hate doing the most are designing websites and drawing robots. I hate it's you know what it is that it's like hard angles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like sharp edges, very precise, very functional. When like I want to draw like a strange magical girl in the woods, I want
Yeah.
to draw like a weird little elf guy. I want to, a lot of my work is like categorized as like dark fantasy stuff,
Mm.
and dark fantasy and mechs and droids and robots. It's not the same thing. But I had done some illustrations like that were really good, and it was like, oh, people will see this and know that I can draw and ask me for drawings. No,
Mm.
people saw it and were like, she loves drawing robots. We should ask her to continue to draw robots and design web pages. And I thought I was going to lose my mind, Anika. I was like, why is this happening to me? Why
Yeah.
do people only, it's because that's all I had. That's all I was showing off. So I
Mm.
definitely, when I post to social media and when I create a resume or a portfolio, because some jobs are like, show us what you can do, and then I'm not going to send my dark fantasy stuff to a children's illustration gig. I'm going to send my
Mm-hmm.
children's illustration to that gig. You
Yeah.
definitely tailor and cater it, and I don't put anything on my Instagram anymore that I wouldn't want somebody to commission me for or approach me with a contract for ever again. No
Yeah.
robots. You can't find a
Yeah.
robot on mine unless it's Star Wars fan art. That's the only robots.
Note to self.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
on the other side of things, do you or what are the considerations that you have when you're taking on new client work? Do you have like a criteria based on your interests or the style that they're looking for, even if it's like something from your portfolio?
Um, my first criteria, to be perfectly honest, doesn't always have anything to do with the work. My first criteria for accepting a client is, do they mention payment first, and do they shy away from my mention of payment? Because as a freelance artist, um, going through the creative space, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten like fully in depth into a conversation with somebody. I realize thinks that I can survive on exposure bucks, or they don't have like a real budget for it, and they definitely don't have the money for my time. And it's taken a very long time to really hold serious value for my time and um my skill, the and the time that I've taken to hone that skill. But I would say definitely that is one of like the top three things that's really important to me when it comes to discussing with a client. um and it's not, I used to feel like, well, gosh, maybe I'm being really shallow. No, it's one of the hardest skills to learn as a creative, of like talking money. I still struggle.
Yeah, it's just
Mm-hmm.
having that negotiation skill and that conversation and really not underselling yourself in that moment too
Mm-hmm. And
is
that's what,
is
what
an
I
art in
struggle with.
itself. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an art in itself. I feel
Yeah.
like first of all, everyone shies away from pricing, not just the clients, but even fellow designers. Now, I think it's easier to have that conversation with your community where if I tell someone this is my hourly rate and this is what I charge
Mm-hmm.
XYZ for a 5 hour video or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
5 hour video, yeah. No, thank you. But
But
if
possible.
it's possible, it could be in parts.
Mm-hmm.
But I think now it's easier to have that conversation with your community because then you can really not have those Fiverr
Mm-hmm.
work undermine your work or value. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just so important to approach it from a strategical standpoint and look at your art not as just art, but as a business where
Mm.
it's feeding your creative soul, but also feeding you at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So, learning that negotiation tactic is really important. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's just how do you do that?
It's definitely a struggle, and it takes some time. Sometimes the thing that gets me through it and I do it properly is, um I get the message from the client, and I sit with it and I think about it, and then I ask somebody that I trust, you know,
Chat
like,
GPT.
yeah.
Uh,
Or just, somebody else that's working in the same industry as me. I'm like, hey, I got this offer from so and so. Just talking about it with somebody else who is creative
Mhm.
that I look up to makes me feel like I have more confidence to say what needs saying. But most of the time when I talk business to you, you seen that picture of the little cat with tears in his eyes? Well, that's who you're talking to about money when you message me about how much it would cost to design, your branding identity. It's the cat on the other side, and she's trying hard. But sometimes I'm like, you know what? It's going to be this much because I spent 15 years teaching myself how to do this,
Mhm.
and I can do this job really well, but it is going to cost you X amount of money, to do that. But most often, I got to talk to my friend before I feel like that. I'm the little baby cat.
Yeah.
Before we get to that point, it's a skill. It's a skill that you have to learn, just like you learn the skill of actually creating the work that you're doing.
Mhm.
Especially when these days we kind of all have to be our own managers, unless you find yourself an agent. You
Yeah.
know.
I think it's also about trusting your instinct, as they say, or the years of experience, which makes that instinct because
Hmm.
it's so true to who you are and what you've been cultivating all these years that
Hmm.
you instantly can tell that, yes, this is the rate, this is the amount of work that I'll be doing, but I'll add some profit hours to that and
Hmm.
some contingency hours to that because maybe something goes wrong, which it
Hmm.
almost always does.
Almost always.
And yeah, I think that's what helps. So
Yeah.
how has the community involvement kind of helped you with that? Has it or has it not?
I would say definitely. I would say, when I talk about community, I don't really, because like I said, I'm kind of an inside cat. So community to me is not necessarily like this massive conglomerate of people. Although I do, often dip my toes into larger spaces with many people. But when I think of community, like, get involved with the creative community or get support from the creative community, offer support to the creative community, I really am talking in my heart about like a couple handfuls of people that have stuck with me, and become trusted friends.
Hmm.
Because I just, I need the word of a friend or somebody that I really look up to, to help revitalize me. Sometimes I just need to like chit chat with a creative buddy while I'm working on something completely unrelated. And just kind of get into that mode in a space with people I know understand me. Maybe that's what it is like it doesn't matter how many people you're talking about as long as you're with people who understand you,
Mm.
understand what you're working on. That is really valuable, and it definitely wakes me up when I'm kind of stuck in the muck, for sure. It definitely woke me up for this past time. Like I said, I just got back from PAX West, got to hang out with some really good friends of mine and stuff. And a lot of the time, we weren't really being creative. We were just showcasing stuff that we had done creatively. And there's nothing like being in a space of creative people who look at your stuff and go, "Hey, that's cool." And I'm like, "Oh, oh, that's a nice feeling. That's good, because when you're by yourself, when you're in your own head, you can start believing weird stuff.
Mm.
So when you start believing weird stuff and you feel weird and bad, that's when you need to dip into the community and be like, "Hello out there.
Yeah.
I need friend."
Yeah. Hello, community.
Yeah,
Um,
hello.
so would you say it's the freedom to create what you love or the financial stability that kind of is your definition of success or anything else?
I think it's both, because when there was a time where I was making more money than I am now doing nothing that I loved doing, and I felt worse than when I'm making less money and doing work that I love. Now, this is not
Mm.
to say that, that's what I would choose every time. Because to say again, everybody comes from a different space, and not everybody can afford to say no to work and everything. But I find if I had, like, in a perfect world where I have to choose, I think it's a balance of both. Maybe on the other side, of doing work that fulfills me, because I work on a lot of personal projects for absolutely no monetary gain because I hope it'll turn into something, but I would still have done that anyways, if
Mm.
there was no possibility of getting paid for it. I don't want to end up in a space again where I am working for money only and derive no sense of satisfaction or fulfillment from what I'm creating. That would make me a sad bean, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would take less money to have that fulfillment, for
Mm.
sure.
Yeah, I don't think we touched on this earlier, but there are quieter times, and then you also get rejections from gigs or maybe jobs that people applied to. How do
Hmm.
you kind of deal with that? Do you still choose to make fan art or work on passion projects or anything
Um,
else?
I try to channel. I channel the disappointment into spite, and then and hear me out, okay? I channel the disappointment into spite, and when somebody's like, "No, sorry, we're looking for somebody else," I'm like, "All right, I think I would have done a good job, so I'm gonna
Mm.
take that rejection." And then I'm going to work furiously like a mad scientist on something that's super similar and post that. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't do this all the time. I don't do it every time, but sometimes I'm like, you know what? I could have drawn your magical girls for you. Like, that's my
Mm.
forte, baby. And it's fine if you don't want me. That's cool, but I am gonna do a brand new series of magical girls and put it where you can see it. Be
Yeah.
like, this is what could have been. This could be
Yeah.
us, but you playing. And it works a couple of times. Somebody was like, "Hey, maybe we could re-talk about that," and I was like, "Okay, that's cool." Doesn't work every time, but the thing is,
Mm.
I applied for a job that I liked. I didn't get it, but I still made a thing out of it because I was preparing myself to get ready to do that.
Yeah.
Why should you rob yourself of that energy you started building, that momentum you started collecting?
Mm.
Um, because somebody said no, when most of the time it doesn't mean that you're not good enough. It doesn't mean that they don't like you. It just means that they're, from a business standpoint, somebody else was a better choice, or they had a lot of people who applied. You never truly know. But if you
Yeah.
if you work yourself up to doing a particular creative job and it doesn't pan out, you should still do that creative job for yourself. Try it. You know,
Yeah.
feels
And
good.
just to close this off, do you think that there's something that creatives in this industry overlook when they think about this as a long-term career?
I think the thing that I overlooked the most was, kind of what we mentioned before, and that is that you don't wake up every day like a Disney princess. I don't open my window and birds don't sing at me while I draw the best picture I've ever drawn. I wake up a lot of time like, oh, I haven't finished that poster. Oh my God. I'm sipping my coffee, grumbling into the mug, like, I'm gonna have to get in there and design that damn banner. And I'm gonna like, it's a job. A job's a job's a job. And when you do something creative, there are definitely some incredible moments that you are gifted where you're like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome, you know. But do not, if you really want to do something creative as your occupation, do not let that first moment of like, I'm not enjoying this, kind of scare you away from it, because you're probably going to feel like that a lot, throughout it, just like anybody would feel at their job. But the moments where you feel awesome about what you're working on and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe somebody's giving me money to do this, that vastly outweighs the, man, if I have to draw one more robot, design one more website, it outweighs all that, so draw the robots when you have to draw the robots, because eventually somebody will ask you for a dragon. Okay, it'll
I
happen.
love that. Yeah, no, that is a sage piece of advice
Thank you.
from Voodoo Val. Thank you so much for being here, Val,
My
and spending
pleasure.
your time with us. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope to see you on another episode in the future.
Yeah, call me anytime, girlfriend. This was fun.
This conversation was so inspiring, and I have so much thinking to do. But so do you. Here's your simple 1 week plan: set aside 3 short 10-minute sessions to create something just for you, make 2 small improvements to your portfolio or your website, and talk to one person that you'd like to collaborate with. And then take 1 full day off. As a small business owner and a creative, it's really important to step aside, step back, and pull away from the metrics and the noise that's taking you away from your real goal. And really focus on telling that story for the right people to find you. If you like this episode, share it with your creative community or someone who's feeling the creative burnout. New episodes of Able Heads drop every other week, so follow wherever you're listening, and I'll see you on the next one.